Martin's hand trembled as he stared at the unfamiliar jewelry store receipt tucked inside their joint bank statement. 40 years of marriage, and now this. The evening light through his study window cast long shadows across his desk, while the scent of lemon polish, applied every Sunday without fail, mingled with the saltiness of the first tear that splashed onto the glass-covered wedding photo in his hand. "Eleanor," he whispered, voice cracking on her name. "Has someone you trusted completely ever betrayed you when you least expected it? Share your story below, like if Martin's pain resonates with you, and follow to see how a lifetime of wisdom becomes his greatest weapon." In the distance, he heard Eleanor's hushed laughter on the phone, then sudden silence when his chair creaked. He carefully wiped away the evidence of his pain with a monogrammed handkerchief, a gift from their 25th anniversary, and straightened his shoulders. As a forensic accountant for 4 decades, he knew that numbers never lied, even when people did. And these numbers told a devastating story of deception that was only beginning to unfold. Martin settled into his leather chair, the familiar creak welcoming him as he switched on the desk lamp. Its warm glow illuminated his meticulously organized study, a sanctuary built over 40 years of marriage and a successful career as a forensic accountant. He reached for the stack of mail he'd brought from the kitchen, inhaling the lingering scent of lemon polish he applied every Sunday without fail. The household accounts were his domain, a routine he maintained even in retirement. His fingers, still steady despite his 68 years, sorted through the envelopes until he paused at their joint bank statement. Something felt off. He slipped on his reading glasses and carefully opened it. At first, the numbers aligned with his mental ledger: mortgage payment, utilities, groceries. Then his eye caught it, a withdrawal for $3,500 that Eleanor had explained was for inventory at her boutique. Below it, slipped between the statement pages, was a receipt from Donovan's Jewelry, a store he'd never heard of, dated 3 days after their anniversary had passed without acknowledgement. Not for the boutique. Martin's stomach tightened as his mind, trained by decades of following financial discrepancies, began connecting dots he didn't want to see. His gaze drifted to the silver-framed wedding photo on his desk. Eleanor's smile, radiant against the backdrop of autumn leaves, had once been his anchor. His thumb traced the outline of her face behind the glass. The first tear formed slowly, hanging on his lower lash, before falling onto the photo frame with a silent splash. His breath caught in his throat as memories flooded back. Eleanor's laughter on their honeymoon, her hand in his at their daughter Lisa's birth, quiet evenings planning their future. 40 years of shared history suddenly called into question by a single unexplained transaction. From down the hall came Eleanor's voice, hushed and animated as she spoke on the phone. When his chair creaked as he shifted weight, her tone immediately changed, followed by a telling silence. "Martin, are you in your study?" she called out, voice artificially bright. "Just checking the accounts," he answered, surprised by the steadiness in his voice despite the tremor in his hand. "Don't stay up too late, dear." Martin carefully removed his glasses, folding them with deliberate precision beside the statement. Another tear escaped, which he caught with the monogrammed handkerchief from his pocket. Eleanor's gift on their 25th anniversary. The irony wasn't lost on him. With forensic attention to detail, he noticed something else, a smudge on the jewelry receipt where the salesperson's signature should be. The same kind of smudge he'd seen hundreds of times in his career when documents had been altered. His professional instincts, dormant but not forgotten, stirred to life. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked steadily, marking time in a home that suddenly felt like unfamiliar territory. As Martin carefully tucked the statement and receipt into his desk drawer, a soft knock on the front door broke the silence. Who would visit at this hour? Martin's hand froze on the desk drawer. The knock came again, more insistent this time. He quickly wiped away any trace of tears with his handkerchief and tucked it back into his pocket before rising from his chair. The floorboards creaked beneath his slippers as he made his way through the dimly lit hallway. Opening the front door revealed Roy Winters, his 71-year-old neighbor from across the street, holding a covered dish. "Evening, Martin." Martha sent over some of her apple cobbler. "Said you mentioned last week how much you missed it." Roy's weathered face creased into a smile that faded as he studied Martin's expression. "Everything all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just tired, Roy. Please thank Martha for me." Martin accepted the dish with a forced smile, hoping the porch light wasn't bright enough to reveal his reddened eyes. After Roy departed with a concerned backward glance, Martin returned to his study, placing the untouched cobbler on a side table. He settled back into his chair, the earlier discovery still churning in his mind. Pulling out his laptop, he attempted to log into their joint banking account, something he hadn't done in months since Eleanor had taken over managing the online passwords to simplify things. "Access denied" flashed on the screen after his third attempt. Password changed. When? Martin's jaw tightened. He tried their investment account with the same result. A cold certainty began replacing his initial shock. This wasn't coincidence. It was coordination. He opened the desk drawer again, removing the bank statement and jewelry receipt. The numbers swam before his eyes. Not from tears this time, but from rising anger. As a forensic accountant, he'd spent decades tracking financial deceptions. He'd just never expected to use those skills in his own home, investigating his own wife. From upstairs came the sound of the shower running. Eleanor would be occupied for at least 15 minutes. Martin moved quietly to the kitchen where her purse sat on the counter. The old Martin, trusting, devoted husband of 40 years, would never have considered looking through it. That Martin had died with the discovery of the jewelry receipt. Inside her purse, tucked into a side pocket, he found her planner. Flipping through the pages, his fingers stopped at the coming Sunday. Written in Eleanor's elegant script was a notation: "Family meeting, M." His stomach dropped. His daughter Lisa had been unusually distant lately, canceling their standing lunch date twice in a row. The last time they spoke, she'd sounded strained, making vague references to helping Mom with some things. They're planning something, together. The shower stopped. Martin quickly returned the planner to its place and made it back to his study just as Eleanor's footsteps moved across their bedroom floor above. He sat down heavily, the leather chair's protest seeming to echo his own internal distress. On the computer screen, his email inbox showed a message from Lisa sent 3 days ago that he hadn't opened yet. "Dad, can we talk? There are some concerns about..." The preview text ended there. He clicked to open it, but a notification appeared. The message had been deleted by the sender. The calendar on his desk showed another notation in his own handwriting: "Lisa, lunch tomorrow, 1 p.m. He'd made the reservation at their usual cafe a week ago, hoping to understand her sudden coolness. Now the pieces were starting to align in a pattern he recognized all too well from his professional life, the pattern of coordinated deception. Martin closed his eyes, fighting the burning sensation of more tears threatening to form. When he opened them again, his gaze was drawn to the family photo on the bookshelf: Eleanor, Lisa, and himself at Lisa's law school graduation. The three of them smiling, arms linked, a perfect family moment captured in time. He stood up and turned the frame face down. From the hallway came Eleanor's voice, artificially cheerful. "Martin, I'm making some tea. Would you like a cup?" "No," he answered, surprised by the steadiness in his voice. "I have some things to check before bed." As her footsteps retreated toward the kitchen, Martin opened his cell phone contacts and scrolled to a name he hadn't called in months. James Sullivan, his attorney friend of 40 years. His finger hovered over the number. Not yet. He needed more information. Instead, he pulled out a legal pad and began writing down what he knew so far, what he suspected, and what he needed to confirm. By the time Eleanor called goodnight from the bedroom doorway, the initial shock had crystallized into something else entirely, a strategic determination that would have been familiar to anyone who had ever faced him in a courtroom. The night ahead would be sleepless, but productive. Tomorrow would bring answers, one way or another. Chapter 3: The Gathering Storm. Martin woke before dawn, though woke implied he'd slept. In truth, he'd merely drifted between vigilance and exhaustion, his mind cataloging suspicious moments from recent months that he'd dismissed at the time. Eleanor's side of the bed remained undisturbed. She'd claimed a headache and slept in the guest room, a happening that had become increasingly common. The house was silent as he slipped downstairs in the gray pre-morning light. Saturday had always begun with their ritual breakfast together, 40 years of coffee and conversation, planning weekend projects or visits with Lisa. Today, the kitchen stood empty, the coffee maker untouched. On the counter sat Eleanor's note. "Meeting with Marianne about boutique issues. Back by noon. Don't wait on breakfast. E." Her sister, Marianne, had never shown interest in the boutique before. Another piece, falling into a pattern he didn't want to see. Martin made a single cup of coffee and carried it through the quiet house, checking rooms with new, suspicious eyes. In the formal living room, a space they used only for holidays and special occasions, he paused. The furniture had been subtly rearranged. The armchairs and sofa now formed a loose circle, as if prepared for a gathering, a meeting, not subtle enough, Eleanor. His professional instincts hummed with recognition. How many times had he seen this preparation for an intervention in cases involving elderly financial exploitation? The staged concern, the family gathering, the careful positioning to make the target feel surrounded. Martin's coffee turned bitter in his mouth. He set the cup down on a side table and continued his inspection, moving upstairs to their bedroom. Eleanor's closet yielded nothing unusual, but the drawer of her nightstand was slightly ajar. He hesitated only briefly before pulling it open. Beneath a novel lay a glossy brochure, Suncrest Senior Living Options. Several pages were dog-eared, including one for a memory care wing. Martin's hands began to tremble, not with sadness this time, but with a cold, clarifying anger. He carried the brochure to the garden bench, his favorite thinking spot where roses he'd tended for decades now bloomed in the early morning light. The wooden slats, weathered and familiar beneath him, had supported him through career decisions, parenting challenges, retirement planning, all discussed with Eleanor at his side. Now he sat alone, reading about how Suncrest offered compassionate solutions for families concerned about a loved one's ability to manage independently. Memory care. Cognitive decline. Inability to manage finances. The narrative Eleanor was constructing became crystal clear. Martin's jaw tightened as he recalled her recent comments, so carefully casual. "You forgot to pay the water bill last month, remember?" He hadn't forgotten. She had insisted on handling it. "You seem confused about the boutique finances, dear." He wasn't confused. She was being evasive. From inside the house came the faint sound of Eleanor's voice. She must have returned early. Martin strained to hear. Yes, everyone's confirmed for 3 o'clock. No, he doesn't suspect anything. After today, the accounts won't be an issue anymore. A breath caught in his throat, turning almost to a sob before he controlled it. He had faced corporate fraud, embezzlement schemes, and complex financial deceptions throughout his career, but nothing had prepared him for the clinical precision of his wife's betrayal. Martin carefully refolded the brochure. As he stood to return it to her nightstand before she discovered his search, a memory surfaced, Roy's words from weeks ago over their chess game. Martha's cousin lost everything when his wife convinced everyone he couldn't manage his affairs anymore. Nasty business, these gray divorces. At the time, Martin had murmured sympathetic platitudes. Now Roy's story took on the quality of warning. The garden gate creaked as a neighbor waved from the sidewalk. Martin raised his hand automatically, swallowing his distress behind a practiced smile. 40 years in courtrooms and deposition rooms had taught him the value of an unreadable expression. He slipped back inside and replaced the brochure exactly as he'd found it, then washed any trace of tears from his face in the bathroom sink. In the mirror, he straightened his shoulders and adjusted his collar with deliberate precision. Whatever was coming at 3 o'clock, he would not be the confused, declining old man of Eleanor's narrative. And the doorbell rang just as the grandfather clock struck 2:30. Early arrivals, then. Martin drew a deep breath and moved toward the door, mind shifting from shock to strategy. For 40 years he had trusted Eleanor with his heart. Now he would rely on himself, his expertise, his intellect, his hard-earned wisdom. The bell rang again, more insistently. Martin straightened his tie, smoothed non-existent wrinkles from his shirt, and reached for the door handle. His hand, he noted with professional satisfaction, was perfectly steady. Martin opened the front door to find Eleanor's sister Marianne on the porch, her husband Robert standing awkwardly behind her. Marianne's usual warm embrace was replaced by a stiff, rehearsed smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Martin, dear, we're a bit early, I know." Her gaze darted past him, searching for Eleanor. "She's around somewhere," Martin said pleasantly, stepping aside to let them enter. "Coffee's fresh if you'd like some." In the kitchen, he moved with deliberate normalcy, reaching for mugs while tracking their uncomfortable glances. Marianne kept checking her phone, typing rapid responses. "Beautiful day," Martin remarked, passing Robert his coffee. "How's retirement treating you these days?" Robert's attempt at casual conversation faltered under Martin's steady gaze. Before long, the doorbell rang again. This time Lisa stood on the threshold, her expression a mixture of resolve and discomfort that pained Martin more than anything else had. "Dad," she said simply, accepting his embrace with rigid shoulders. By 3 o'clock, the staged tableau was complete. Eleanor had materialized from wherever she'd been hiding, ushering everyone into the formal living room, now clearly arranged for the family meeting noted in her planner. 2 of Eleanor's cousins had arrived, along with their family doctor, Dr. Winters, whose presence confirmed Martin's suspicions about the nature of this gathering. Martin took his seat in his usual armchair, now positioned as if on trial before the semicircle of concerned faces. He folded his hands calmly in his lap and waited. Eleanor cleared her throat, launching into what was clearly a practiced speech. "Martin, we've asked everyone here today because we care about you deeply." Her voice carried the artificial warmth of a rehearsed performance. "There's no easy way to say this, but I've decided to file for divorce." A ripple of practiced concern moved through the assembled family members. Martin kept his expression neutral, studying each face. The way Lisa couldn't meet his eyes, how Marianne's mouth tightened with discomfort. Eleanor continued, voice taking on a tone of practiced compassion. I've noticed some concerning changes lately. The forgotten bills, the confusion about finances, the mood swings. Dr. Winters nodded supportively, while Eleanor detailed a litany of symptoms Martin had allegedly displayed, all either fabricated or twisted versions of normal moments. We're worried about your ability to manage independently, Eleanor concluded, reaching for his hand across the coffee table. This isn't about blame, Martin. It's about getting you the support you need during this transition. The room fell silent, all eyes on Martin. They expected tears, confusion, perhaps anger, reactions that would confirm the narrative Eleanor had constructed. Martin allowed the silence to stretch until it became uncomfortable. Then he simply nodded once and said, "If that's your decision, Eleanor, I understand completely." The response visibly startled her. This wasn't in her script. "You understand?" Eleanor's composure slipped momentarily. "Yes." Martin's voice remained steady, his expression unreadable. "After 40 years, I'd hope we could handle this with dignity." "I assume you've already consulted an attorney?" Eleanor blinked rapidly. "Well, yes, but—" "Good. Then I'll do the same." He turned to Dr. Winters. "I appreciate your concern, Doctor, but I had my annual cognitive assessment with Dr. Patterson last month. I'm sure you can obtain those records if needed." The gathering dissolved into awkward murmurs. Lisa stared at her father, something like doubt creeping into her expression. Marianne shifted uncomfortably on the sofa. "Perhaps we should all take some time to process," Martin suggested, standing smoothly. "I believe I'll take a walk." He moved toward the door with measured steps, feeling Eleanor's stunned gaze on his back. As he reached for his jacket, he turned and addressed the room with perfect composure. "I've always believed that truth reveals itself in time. I look forward to that revelation." The door closed behind him with a quiet click that echoed in the stunned silence he left behind. Martin walked steadily until he rounded the corner, out of sight from the house. Only then did his carefully constructed facade begin to crumble. He made it 3 more blocks before finding a secluded bench in the neighborhood park. There, alone with no witnesses, Martin Hargrove, respected forensic accountant, devoted husband of 40 years, father who had never once cried in front of his daughter, finally allowed himself to break down completely. His shoulders shook with silent, heaving sobs that tore through his chest. Rage, betrayal, and grief crashed over him in waves. His hand struck the bench once in a rare physical expression of the violence of his emotions. But even as the tears flowed, his mind, the precise, analytical instrument that had built his career, began to work. By the time he had exhausted his tears, the initial shock had crystallized into cold determination. Martin wiped his face with his handkerchief, drew several deep breaths, and pulled out his phone. His hand was perfectly steady as he dialed. "James, it's Martin Hargrove. I need your help on a personal matter." He paused, listening. "No, not tomorrow. Today. It's urgent." As darkness began to fall, Martin returned to his empty house. Everyone had gone, including Eleanor, who had left a note about staying with Marianne for a few days to give you space. Space was exactly what he needed, but not for the reason she imagined. Martin locked the door to his study and powered up his laptop. Before Eleanor returned, he would need to understand exactly what he was facing. His decades of professional experience had taught him that financial trails told stories that people tried to hide. and he intended to uncover every chapter of Eleanor's deception, no matter how painful the reading might be. The cafe where Martin and Lisa had shared lunch every month for years felt different today, colder somehow, despite the sunshine streaming through the windows. Martin arrived 15 minutes early, selecting their usual corner table with its view of the small courtyard. He ordered coffee for two and waited, watching the door with a composure that masked his inner turmoil. When Lisa finally entered, her hesitation was visible. A momentary pause as she spotted him, a tightening around her eyes. She'd always been terrible at hiding her emotions, even as a child. He'd found it endearing then. Now it told him everything he needed to know about her role in Eleanor's plans. "Dad," she said, sliding into the seat opposite him. She left her coffee untouched. "Thank you for coming." Martin kept his voice gentle. "I thought we should talk, just the two of us." Lisa's gaze darted around the cafe before settling somewhere over his left shoulder. "Mom's worried about you. We all are." "Are you?" Martin asked, studying her face. "Or are you worried about what your mother has told you?" "Dad, I've seen it myself." The confusion about the boutique finances, forgetting appointments. "Which appointments have I forgotten, Lisa?" Martin interrupted, his tone still calm but firm. She faltered. "Mom said you forgot your doctor's appointment last month. I rescheduled it when your mother asked me to drive her to meet with a supplier. I have the confirmation email." He sipped his coffee. "What else has she told you?" Lisa's discomfort grew visible. "This isn't an interrogation, Dad. No, it's a conversation between a father and daughter, one I'd hoped would include honesty." The hurt crept into his voice despite his efforts. "You've been avoiding me for weeks. You canceled our last two lunches. Was that your idea or your mother's?" "That's not fair," Lisa protested, though her eyes flickered with uncertainty. "What's not fair is watching my daughter participate in what appears to be a coordinated effort to question my competence." Martin leaned forward. "Lisa, I've spent 40 years investigating financial discrepancies. Did your mother really think I wouldn't notice unusual withdrawals, changed passwords, the senior living brochure in her nightstand?" Lisa's face paled. "She said you were confused about money, that you'd been making mistakes." "Has she shown you any evidence of these mistakes?" Martin asked quietly. The silence that followed was answer enough. "I'm not confused, Lisa, but I am deeply disappointed." Martin's voice finally broke on the last word. "I never thought I'd have to defend my sanity to my own daughter." Lisa's chair scraped loudly against the floor as she stood. "I can't do this. You're twisting everything around." "Am I? Or is that what you've been told to expect from me?" Martin remained seated, looking up at his daughter's conflicted face. "All I'm asking is that you consider the possibility that your mother's narrative isn't the complete truth." "Mom would never—" Lisa stopped, uncertainty clouding her face. "Wouldn't she? The woman who's been siphoning funds from our accounts, who's changed all our passwords, who staged a family intervention to announce a divorce while simultaneously suggesting I'm mentally declining." Martin kept his voice low, but the pain was evident. "The evidence exists, Lisa. When you're ready to see it, call me." She hesitated, conflict visible in her expression, then turned and walked quickly toward the door, leaving her untouched coffee behind. Martin sat alone, feeling the curious glances from nearby patrons who had witnessed the tense exchange. The empty chair across from him seemed to mock his isolation. First his wife, now his daughter, the two people he had trusted most. Rain had begun to fall by the time he walked home, a fitting accompaniment to his darkening thoughts. Inside the house, he headed straight to his study to continue the investigation he'd begun the previous night. The locked drawer where he'd secured copies of their financial records stood open, its contents missing. A cold dread settled in Martin's stomach as he moved quickly through the house, checking other hiding places. His external hard drive with backup files, gone. The folder of account statements he'd hidden behind the reference books, vanished. In their bedroom, Eleanor's closet stood half empty, key pieces of her wardrobe removed. The jewelry box on her dresser lay open, family heirlooms that had belonged to his mother now missing. Martin's hands trembled as he tried to access their joint accounts online again. Not only were the passwords still changed, but the security questions had been altered. His call to the bank confirmed his worst fears. Eleanor had visited in person that morning, exercising her power of attorney to restrict access to their joint accounts, citing concerns about his cognitive state. The financial fortress he had spent decades building was now being used as a prison to contain him. Martin sank onto the bench in their garden, oblivious to the intensifying rain soaking through his clothes. For the first time since discovering Eleanor's betrayal, he felt something worse than anger or grief. He felt defeat. The carefully constructed dignity he had maintained crumbled entirely. His shoulders shook with sobs that tore from somewhere deep inside, the full weight of betrayal finally breaking through his professional composure. He didn't hear the approaching footsteps until a shadow fell across him. Looking up through rain and tears, he saw Roy standing there, holding an umbrella over them both. "Thought I might find you out here," Roy said quietly, settling beside Martin on the bench. "Saw your girl leave the cafe upset. Figured things didn't go well." Martin couldn't summon the strength to maintain pretenses. "She's sided with Eleanor. They all have." Roy nodded, seeming unsurprised. "My Martha's cousin, the one I mentioned. Same thing happened to him. Family all turned by the time he realized what was happening." "She's taken everything, Roy. The accounts, the records, even changed the security questions. I've spent my life investigating financial fraud, and now I'm the victim of it in my own home." Martin's voice cracked with the bitter irony. "Martha's cousin made the same mistake you're making," Roy said, his tone gentle but firm. "He tried to fight it alone. I don't have a choice. My own daughter thinks I'm losing my mind." "You have me," Roy said simply. "And I'd bet my pension you've got other friends who'd stand by you if they knew the truth." Martin looked up, rainwater and tears indistinguishable on his face. "What's the point? She's already convinced everyone that matters." "The point," Roy said, helping Martin to his feet, "is that you know the truth. And from what I remember about Martin Hargrove, that's always been enough for him to build a case." As they walked slowly back toward Martin's house, Roy's umbrella sheltering them both, Martin felt something stir beneath the despair, a small, flickering resolve that refused to be extinguished completely. "First thing," Roy said as they reached Martin's door, "you call that attorney friend of yours, what's his name, the one you play golf with?" "James Sullivan." "Call James, then you come over for dinner. Martha's making pot roast, and you look like you haven't eaten in days." Roy's tone brooked no argument. "This isn't over, Martin. It's just beginning." Looking into his friend's determined face, Martin felt the first fragile tendril of hope take root. Perhaps he wasn't entirely alone after all. Has life ever stolen your foundation when you least expected it? Share your darkest moment below, like if Martin's tears feel familiar, and follow his journey from despair to dignity. Chapter 6. Gathering Strength. Roy's modest apartment above his garage was nothing like the spacious home Martin had shared with Eleanor, but the warmth it offered had nothing to do with square footage. Martha Winters, Roy's wife of 47 years, greeted Martin with a firm hug that asked no questions and offered unconditional support. "Eat first, talk later," she insisted, setting before him a plate of pot roast that he couldn't imagine finishing. Yet somehow, surrounded by the winter's comfortable conversation about neighborhood happenings and their grandchildren's latest achievements, Martin found himself cleaning his plate for the first time in days. After dinner, as Martha busied herself in the kitchen, Roy pulled 3 folders from a cabinet and laid them on the coffee table. "Been waiting for the right time to show you these," Roy said, his usual jovial manner replaced by something more somber. "Thought I'd never have reason to, but here we are." Martin opened the first folder to find legal documents, bank statements, and handwritten notes meticulously organized, all bearing the name of one Thomas Winters. "Your cousin?" Martin asked, remembering Roy's earlier references. Roy nodded. "Martha's cousin Tom, retired architect, sharp as they come. His second wife, Judith, pulled almost exactly what Eleanor's trying with you. Convinced his kids he was slipping mentally, restricted his accounts, pushed for power of attorney." Martin's professional eye scanned the documents, recognizing the pattern immediately. "What happened?" "He lost everything," Roy said bluntly. "The house, most of his savings, his relationship with his children. By the time he realized what was happening, she'd laid such a convincing groundwork that even his lawyer believed he might be experiencing cognitive decline." The second folder contained newspaper clippings about similar cases, elderly individuals stripped of their autonomy and assets through carefully orchestrated campaigns questioning their competence. "It's more common than anyone wants to admit," Roy continued, "especially with men your age, successful, used to being in control, not wanting to admit something's wrong. Makes you the perfect target. They count on shame keeping you quiet until it's too late." Martin felt a chill of recognition. "And the third folder?" Roy's expression softened slightly. "That's how Tom fought back. Didn't work for him. He started too late, made too many emotional mistakes. But I've been adding to it, researching. Thought maybe someday it might help someone else." The third folder contained strategies, legal precedents, and contact information for specialists in elder law and financial exploitation. Martin recognized it immediately for what it was: a battle plan. "This is why you've been telling me about your cousin these past months," Martin said slowly. "You suspected something was happening with Eleanor." Roy nodded. "Noticed some patterns. Didn't want to overstep, but wanted you to know you weren't alone if it came to this." He paused. "You're not Tom, Martin. You've got something he didn't." "What's that?" 40 years of following money trails that people tried to hide. And friends who know exactly who you are." For the first time since the intervention, Martin felt a spark of his old confidence returning. "I need to call James." James Sullivan's law office projected exactly the combination of established tradition and cutting-edge competence that had made him one of the city's most respected attorneys. Though it was well past normal business hours, James had come in specially, his secretary bringing coffee, as Martin laid out the situation. "Damn," James said when Martin finished. "Eleanor always seemed so devoted, trustworthy," Martin supplied, the bitterness creeping into his voice despite his efforts. "I was going to say straightforward," James replied. "Never would have pegged her for this level of calculation." "That makes 2 of us." James pushed aside his coffee. "All right, let's approach this methodically. We need to counter this narrative about your cognitive state immediately. I'm sending you to Dr. Harriet Chen for a comprehensive evaluation tomorrow morning. She's the best neuropsychologist in the state. No one questions her assessments." Martin nodded, relieved to be moving into practical territory. "Next, we need to track the money," James continued. "Eleanor's restricted your access to the accounts, but that works both ways. Once we have Dr. Chen's report, we can file for an emergency injunction to freeze everything until the court sorts it out." "She's already moving assets," Martin said. "The heirlooms from my mother are gone. Document everything that's missing. Photographs, appraisals, if you have them." James made notes. "You mentioned the boutique as a possible front for moving money?" "I've suspected it for months. The numbers never added up to the inventory I saw when I'd visit." James looked up. "Can you still access the cloud storage for the boutique?" Martin paused, considering. "Eleanor changed all our passwords, but—" A realization dawned. "The boutique uses accounting software I set up years ago. The backup goes to a separate cloud account that she probably doesn't even remember exists." James smiled for the first time. "There's the Martin Hargrove I know. Let's see what those records tell us." By midnight, hunched over James's conference room table, with takeout containers pushed aside, Martin had reconstructed a damning financial trail. The boutique had been operating at a loss for over a year, yet Eleanor had been withdrawing substantial business expenses that never appeared in the inventory or vendor payments. More disturbing were the transfers to an account belonging to a B. Pierce, regular payments labeled as consulting fees that had increased in both frequency and amount over the past 6 months. "Who's B. Pierce?" James asked, studying the pattern Martin had highlighted. "I don't know yet, but I intend to find out." Martin's voice had regained its professional edge. A knock at the door revealed James's secretary with a stack of documents. "The preliminary asset search you requested, Mr. Sullivan." James spread the papers on the table. "I took the liberty of having my team start looking into Eleanor's financial footprint beyond your joint accounts." Martin scanned the documents, his trained eye quickly spotting the anomalies. "She's opened 3 new accounts in the past year, and there's a safe deposit box I knew nothing about." "Classic preparation for divorce," James observed. "She's been planning this for some time." Rather than deepening his despair, the confirmation strengthened Martin's resolve. This was familiar territory, following financial deception, building a case piece by piece. By the time Martin left James's office, they had a clear strategy. Dr. Chen's evaluation in the morning, emergency injunction to freeze assets by afternoon, and a forensic team beginning work on documenting the full extent of Eleanor's financial maneuvers. The rain had stopped when Martin emerged into the night air, Roy waiting patiently in his truck to drive him home. "How'd it go?" Roy asked, as Martin climbed in. "We have a plan," Martin said simply. Then, after a moment, "Thank you, Roy, for seeing what I couldn't." Roy nodded, understanding the depth behind the simple words. What are neighbors for if not to watch out for each other? When they arrived at Martin's house, the windows were dark. Eleanor was still staying with Marianne, giving Martin the space he now desperately needed to mount his defense. In his study, Martin stood looking at the framed credentials on his wall, certifications and awards from his 40-year career built on finding financial truths that others tried to hide. For the first time since the intervention, he felt like himself again, not just a betrayed husband, but Martin Hargrove, forensic accountant, whose expertise was about to become his greatest weapon. He picked up a pen, its weight familiar and reassuring in his hand. On a legal pad, he began to write, not the emotional, scattered notes of a man in shock, but the precise, methodical documentation of a professional building an irrefutable case. By dawn, as light crept into his study, Martin had filled several pages with timelines, questions, and strategies. The despair that had overwhelmed him in the rain-soaked garden seemed distant now, replaced by a clear-eyed determination that had carried him through countless cases throughout his career. This case was different only in that it was personal. But that didn't change the fundamental truth that had guided his professional life. Evidence, properly gathered and presented, revealed stories that no amount of deception could permanently hide. And Eleanor's story was about to be exposed, one bank statement at a time. Martin straightened his tie, studying his reflection in the bathroom mirror. Despite the sleepless nights, he looked remarkably composed, perhaps even formidable. Dr. Chen's comprehensive cognitive assessment had confirmed what he already knew. His mental faculties were not just intact, but functioning at a level impressive for any age, according to her formal report. The emergency injunction James had filed had been granted yesterday afternoon. By now, Eleanor would have discovered that the financial noose she had been tightening around Martin had suddenly become a leash restraining her own movements. Martin's phone buzzed with a text from James. All set for 3 p.m. Everyone confirmed. This wasn't how he had imagined spending his 41st wedding anniversary, preparing for a confrontation with the woman he had once vowed to love until death parted them. A single tear threatened to form, but Martin blinked it away. There would be time for grief later. Today required clarity and focus. He slipped Dr. Chen's report into his leather portfolio, alongside the financial documentation he and James had compiled. The evidence was overwhelming. Eleanor's systematic draining of their accounts, the boutique's role as a money laundering operation, and most damning of all, the identity of B. Pierce, Brandon Pierce, a 46-year-old financial consultant with whom Eleanor had been having an affair for at least 9 months. James's investigator had been thorough, providing photographs of Eleanor and Pierce at restaurants, hotels, and most recently, a jewelry store, Donovan's, where the receipt that had started Martin's investigation originated. The gifts had flowed both ways, it seemed, with Eleanor using marital funds to finance Brandon's lifestyle while he dangled the promise of a new life once Martin was out of the picture. The doorbell rang, interrupting Martin's thoughts. Roy stood on the porch, dressed more formally than Martin had ever seen him, in a pressed shirt and tie. "Ready for this?" Roy asked, his usual jovial expression replaced by something more solemn. "As ready as I'll ever be," Martin replied, collecting his portfolio. The drive to Marianne's house was silent, both men lost in their thoughts. Martin rehearsed what he would say, the careful sequence of revelations James had helped him prepare. They'd agreed that emotion had no place in today's proceedings. This was about facts, evidence, and consequences. Yet as they turned onto Marianne Street, and Martin saw the familiar cars parked outside, Lisa's sedan, Eleanor's luxury SUV, Marianne's hybrid, a moment of doubt surfaced. These were not anonymous adversaries in a courtroom. This was his family. For 40 years, these people had been the center of his world. As if reading his thoughts, Roy spoke quietly. "Remember why you're doing this, Martin. It's not about revenge. It's about truth." Martin nodded, gathering his resolve as they parked behind James's Mercedes. His attorney was already waiting on the sidewalk, his presence adding official weight to the proceedings. "Dr. Chen sent over the final version of her report this morning," James said, as they approached the house. "Absolutely unequivocal about your cognitive status. We also have confirmation that the emergency injunction was served to Eleanor's attorney an hour ago." "How did she react?" Martin couldn't help asking. "According to my contact at the courthouse, her attorney was visibly startled by the evidence presented," James replied with professional satisfaction. They weren't expecting us to move this quickly or have this much documentation. Martin's phone buzzed with an incoming call from Eleanor. He showed the screen to James. "Don't answer," James advised. "Anything you say could be recorded and taken out of context. Let her wonder what's coming." Marianne opened the door before they could ring the bell, her expression shifting from confusion to alarm as she registered not just Martin, but James and Roy as well. "Martin, what is this? We weren't expecting—" "Is everyone here?" Martin interrupted calmly. "Eleanor, Lisa, and you. Good. There are some matters we need to discuss." Without waiting for her response, he stepped past her into the foyer. Through the archway to the living room, he could see Eleanor and Lisa sitting together on the sofa, heads bent in conversation. They looked up as Martin entered, followed by his attorney and Roy. Eleanor's face paled visibly. "Martin, what's going on? Why is James here?" "Professional courtesy," Martin replied evenly. "Since you involved your attorney in our personal matters, I thought it appropriate to involve mine." Lisa stood, confusion evident on her face. "Dad, what is this?" "This," Martin said, placing his portfolio on the coffee table, "is the truth I mentioned was coming. Have you ever had to gather your courage and stand against someone who betrayed your trust? Share your moment of strength below, like if you're standing with Martin, and follow to witness justice unfold in the final confrontation." James stepped forward, assuming the role of moderator. "Mrs. Hargrove, I've been retained by my client, Martin Hargrove, to address some serious concerns regarding financial improprieties and false statements made about his mental capacity." Eleanor's shock quickly transformed into indignation. "This is ridiculous. Martin, are you seriously bringing your lawyer to my sister's house? This is exactly the kind of erratic behavior." Dr. Harriet Chen, Chief of Neuropsychology at University Medical Center, has completed a comprehensive cognitive assessment of Mr. Hargrove, James continued, unperturbed as he removed the report from Martin's portfolio and placed it on the table. "Her findings, certified yesterday, confirm that Mr. Hargrove shows no signs of cognitive impairment whatsoever. In fact, his cognitive function tests in the superior range across all measures." Lisa picked up the report, her eyes widening as she scanned the contents. Martin kept his gaze fixed on Eleanor, watching as her carefully constructed narrative began to crumble. This was just the beginning. "Additionally," James continued, "the court has granted an emergency injunction freezing all joint assets, pending investigation of potential financial exploitation." "Financial exploitation?" Marianne echoed, looking between her sister and Martin. "Eleanor, what is he talking about?" Martin opened his portfolio again, removing the financial documentation he and James had compiled. "It's all here, Marianne. Every unauthorized withdrawal, every transfer to Brandon Pierce's account, every dollar siphoned through the boutique." At the mention of Brandon Pierce's name, Eleanor's composure shattered completely. "You had me investigated?" she gasped. "No, Eleanor," Martin replied quietly. "I simply followed the money. It's what I've done professionally for 40 years. As Martin spread the financial records across the coffee table, he felt a strange sense of calm descend. The confrontation he had dreaded now felt almost like a deposition, a careful presentation of irrefutable facts to an increasingly receptive audience. Lisa's expression shifted from confusion to dawning horror as she studied the documents. Marianne moved to look over her shoulder, gasping as she recognized her sister's signature on damning transfer authorizations. Martin stood ready to present the final piece of evidence, the photographs of Eleanor with Brandon Pierce. But as he reached for the envelope, he realized it wasn't necessary. The financial documentation had done its work. The truth was already revealing itself in Eleanor's crumbling facade and his daughter's tear-filled eyes as she finally looked up to meet his gaze. "Dad," Lisa whispered, "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know about any of this." Martin nodded, a tightness in his chest easing slightly at the genuine remorse in his daughter's voice. Perhaps not everything was lost after all. The silence in Marianne's living room stretched like a wire pulled taut, ready to snap. Eleanor remained frozen on the sofa, her carefully constructed facade crumbling visibly as all eyes turned to her. The financial documents spread across the coffee table told a story more damning than any accusation Martin could have made. "There must be some mistake," Marianne finally said, though her voice lacked conviction as she stared at her sister. "There's no mistake," Martin replied quietly. "The numbers don't lie, even when people do." Lisa had moved away from her mother, the documents clutched in her trembling hands. "Mom, you told me Dad was confused about money, that he was making costly errors. You said that's why you needed to protect the accounts." Eleanor's face hardened as she realized the tide had turned. "You wouldn't understand the pressures I've been under. 40 years of marriage to someone who cared more about balance sheets than his wife's happiness." "Is that why you falsified boutique records to hide money transfers?" Martin asked, his voice steady. "Out of unhappiness? Or why you convinced me Dad was experiencing cognitive decline?" Lisa added, anger beginning to replace her shock. "Was that also because you were unhappy?" Eleanor's gaze darted around the room, searching for an ally and finding none. Even Marianne had stepped away, her expression a mixture of disbelief and dawning comprehension. "Brandon understood me," Eleanor said defensively. "He saw me as more than just a retired accountant's wife." "Brandon Pierce has done this before," James interjected, his professional tone cutting through the emotional tension. "My investigator found 3 previous relationships with affluent older women, all following the same pattern: romance, financial consulting, and eventual disappearance once the assets were liquidated." Martin opened a folder containing the investigator's report on Pierce. "He's not even a licensed financial advisor, Eleanor. His last job was selling timeshares in Florida before he was fired for ethical violations." Eleanor's face paled further. "You're lying. Brandon has a thriving consulting business." "A business with no office, no website, and no clients except you," Martin countered. "I checked thoroughly." Lisa had been silently examining the financial records, her legal training allowing her to grasp the implications quickly. "Mom, this isn't just unethical. It's illegal. These transfers, the boutique records. This is fraud." Eleanor stood abruptly, her composure finally shattering completely. "You have no right to judge me. None of you know what it's like to realize you've wasted your life, to wake up one day and find yourself old with nothing to show for it." "Nothing?" Martin's voice finally betrayed emotion. 40 years of marriage, a daughter, a home, financial security that most people only dream of. That's nothing to you?" "It wasn't enough," Eleanor shouted, tears streaming down her face now. "It was never going to be enough." The raw honesty of her outburst silenced the room. This wasn't the calculated deception they had been documenting. This was the wounded cry of someone Martin suddenly realized he had never truly known. Marianne stepped forward, placing herself between her sister and the others. "I think Eleanor needs some time to process all this." She turned to Martin. "What happens now, legally?" James cleared his throat. The emergency injunction freezes all joint assets pending court review. Given the evidence of financial exploitation, Mr. Hargrove will likely be granted exclusive control of the accounts while divorce proceedings move forward. And the other matters? Marianne asked delicately, glancing toward her sister. The false statements about Mr. Hargrove's cognitive state? James's tone hardened slightly. Those could potentially constitute elder abuse under state law. It would be up to Mr. Hargrove whether to pursue criminal charges. Eleanor's head snapped up, fear replacing anger in her expression. Criminal charges? Martin, you wouldn't— I haven't decided, Martin said truthfully. The vindication he felt was tempered by a profound sadness. This woman had been his partner for 4 decades. Despite her betrayal, the thought of seeing her face criminal consequences stirred complicated emotions. Lisa moved to stand beside her father, her earlier confusion now replaced by protective determination. Dad, there's something else you should know. She hesitated, then continued. Mom asked me to testify about your mental decline in the divorce proceedings. She wanted me to tell the court I'd noticed changes in your behavior. Martin felt the impact of this final betrayal like a physical blow. And would you have done it? I don't know, Lisa admitted, tears welling in her eyes. I believed her when she said she was worried about you, but something felt wrong. That's why I kept canceling our lunches. I couldn't face you knowing what she was asking me to do. Martin nodded, understanding his daughter's conflict. Thank you for telling me the truth now. An uncomfortable silence fell, broken only when James cleared his throat. Perhaps we should continue this discussion another time, once everyone has had a chance to process the information presented today. One more thing, Martin said, reaching into his portfolio for a final document. The deed to our house is in my name alone. It was my parents' home, as you know. I inherited it before we married, and while I've always thought of it as ours, legally it remains solely mine. He looked directly at Eleanor. You'll need to find other accommodations. Eleanor's face crumpled. You're putting me out on the street. After 40 years? No, Martin replied evenly. I'm giving you until the end of the month to make arrangements. That's more consideration than you showed me when you planned to have me declared incompetent and moved to Suncrest's memory care wing. The reminder of her ultimate plan silenced any further protests from Eleanor. Marianne stepped forward again. She can stay with me until she figures things out. As they prepared to leave, Lisa touched Martin's arm. Dad, can we talk? Just us? Martin nodded, his heart lightening slightly at the possibility of reconciliation with his daughter. Outside on Marianne's porch, away from the tense atmosphere of the living room, Lisa faced her father directly. I'm so sorry. I should have trusted my instincts about you instead of her stories. You were manipulated by someone who's had decades of practice appearing sincere, Martin said gently. I don't blame you for that. Still, I should have asked you directly instead of avoiding you. Lisa's legal training reasserted itself. What can I do to help now? Come to dinner tomorrow, Martin suggested. We have a lot of catching up to do. As they walked to their respective cars, Martin felt a single tear track down his cheek, not of grief or anger this time, but of relief. The truth had finally emerged, painful though it was, and with it came the first fragile tendril of something he had thought lost forever, hope for the future. In the car beside him, Roy squeezed Martin's shoulder briefly before starting the engine. Proud of you, friend. That couldn't have been easy. No, Martin agreed, watching through the window as James spoke quietly with Lisa beside her car. But necessary. As they pulled away from Marianne's house, Martin didn't look back at the building where Eleanor remained. Instead, he focused on the road ahead, leading back to the home that had been in his family for generations, the home that would remain his, a foundation upon which to rebuild his life. The confrontation he had dreaded for days was over. The battle, legal, financial, and emotional, was likely just beginning. But for the first time since discovering Eleanor's betrayal, Martin felt equal to the challenge. After all, he had spent his entire career uncovering financial deceptions. It seemed fitting that his professional expertise had ultimately protected him from personal exploitation. Some might call it justice. Martin simply called it truth. And truth, however painful, was always preferable to comforting lies. 6 months passed, with the steady rhythm of seasons changing. Autumn leaves gave way to winter frost, then spring buds, marking time's passage as the legal process wound its way through the courts. Martin stood on his front porch, coffee cup in hand, watching the morning sunlight filter through the oak trees he had planted decades ago. The divorce had been finalized last week, the judgment as decisive as it was fair. Martin retained the family home, full control of his retirement accounts, and substantial restitution for the funds Eleanor had diverted. Eleanor received enough to start over. Martin wasn't vindictive. But the financial security she had tried to steal from him remained firmly in his hands. Brandon Pierce had disappeared long before the court date, vanishing with the last of the cash gifts Eleanor had given him once news of the asset freeze reached him. Martin had felt a grim satisfaction in the investigator's report detailing Pierce's hasty departure from his apartment, leaving Eleanor to face the consequences alone. The boutique had been sold to cover Eleanor's legal fees, its inventory liquidated at a fraction of its claimed value. The grand consulting plans she and Pierce had concocted, supposedly to franchise the boutique concept nationally, existed only in fabricated projections and glossy presentations designed to justify the movement of funds. Eleanor now lived in a small apartment across town, working part-time at a department store. Martin had heard through Marianne that she was adjusting to her new circumstances, a polite way of saying she was struggling with the dramatic downsizing of both her lifestyle and social standing. The friends who had gathered for the intervention had largely drifted away as the truth about her deception emerged. The doorbell interrupted Martin's reflections. Lisa stood on the porch, carrying a dish that smelled suspiciously like her grandmother's apple cobbler recipe. "Thought you might want dessert for later," she said, smiling as Martin took the dish. "I finally managed to get it right, only burned the edges a little this time." Their relationship had healed slowly but steadily over the months. Weekly dinners had become a new tradition, sometimes with her husband joining them, occasionally with Roy and Martha completing their circle. The awkwardness of those first post-confrontation conversations had gradually given way to a deeper, more honest connection than they had shared before. "Come in," Martin said, holding the door. "Coffee's fresh." In the kitchen, brighter now with the new yellow paint Lisa had helped him choose, they settled into comfortable conversation about her work, his volunteer activities, plans for the weekend. Normal family talk that no longer carried the undercurrent of secrets and manipulations that had poisoned the final years of his marriage. "Oh," Lisa said, reaching into her bag, "I brought something else, too." She handed him a business card. "Remember Judge Hamilton from my firm's charity dinner last month? She called me yesterday about this program she's starting." Martin examined the card. Senior Financial Protection Initiative, with the county courthouse logo embossed beneath. "They're looking for volunteers with financial expertise to help educate seniors about exploitation risks and review cases where exploitation is suspected. Lisa explained. "I immediately thought of you." Martin turned the card over thoughtfully. "Teaching others to recognize what I missed myself." "You didn't miss it. You caught it before it was too late," Lisa corrected gently. "That's more than most people in your situation can say." After Lisa left, promising to return Sunday for dinner, Martin carried the business card to his study. The room had transformed in recent months, no longer just a repository of his past career, but a space for his new pursuits. The framed family photos had been rearranged, some removed, others added. Roy and Martha now featured prominently, as did new pictures of Lisa and her husband. One frame remained empty on his desk, waiting for future memories to fill it. Martin picked up his phone and dialed the number on Judge Hamilton's card. As he arranged a meeting to discuss the volunteer program, he felt a sense of purpose that had been missing even before Eleanor's betrayal. Using his expertise to protect others from similar exploitation seemed fitting, a way to transform personal pain into public good. Later that afternoon, Roy arrived for their weekly chess game, now a ritual that both men treasured. As they settled into their chairs on the back porch, the chess pieces arrayed between them, Roy glanced appraisingly at his friend. "You look better," he observed. "More like yourself." Martin nodded, considering his opening move both on the board and in conversation. "I feel more like myself. Or perhaps a new version of myself." "That's how it goes," Roy said, responding to Martin's conventional opening with an unexpected counter. "We keep becoming new versions until the final edition." They played in companionable silence for a while, the familiar click of pieces against the board punctuating their concentration. A soft spring breeze carried the scent of blooming roses from the garden beds Martin had recently restored with Roy's help. "Lisa brought me information about a volunteer opportunity," Martin said eventually, capturing one of Roy's pawns. "Working with seniors at risk of financial exploitation." Roy nodded approvingly. "Seems right up your alley. Your experience, personal and professional." "That's what I thought." Martin paused, watching a pair of cardinals flit through the oak branches. "There's something satisfying about the idea of preventing someone else from going through what I did." "Purpose," Roy said simply. "That's what keeps us going at our age. Having something that matters." After Roy left, promising to bring Martha for Sunday dinner with Lisa, Martin sat alone on the porch swing that had witnessed so many changes in his life. The gentle creaking as it swayed had once symbolized stability and continuity. Now it represented something different, but equally valuable: resilience and renewal. The wedding photo that had prompted his first tears of discovery now rested in a box in the attic, not destroyed in anger, but set aside with deliberate care. 40 years couldn't be erased, shouldn't be forgotten, but needed to be properly placed in the context of a life still unfolding. As twilight softened the garden's edges, Martin allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed him had ultimately revealed strengths he hadn't known he possessed and connections he hadn't fully valued. Roy's friendship, Lisa's love, his own professional expertise, all had combined to carry him through the darkest hours to this moment of peaceful solitude. A single tear traced down his cheek, not of grief or anger this time, but of gentle acceptance. Life had taken an unexpected turn, but he had navigated it with dignity intact and wisdom gained. The path ahead looked different than he had once imagined, but it stretched before him with new possibilities. The phone rang, interrupting his reverie. Judge Hamilton was calling back, eager to schedule his first volunteer session at the senior center for next week. As Martin discussed the details, making notes on the pad he kept by the phone, he felt something settle within him, a quiet certainty that this chapter of his life, though unexpected, might ultimately prove as meaningful as any that had come before. The betrayal that had sought to diminish him had instead revealed his true measure. And that, perhaps, was the most valuable discovery of all. Folks, there's something about betrayal at our age that cuts deeper, isn't there? When you've shared 40 years of morning coffees and evening silences with someone, their deception feels like losing part of yourself. That first tear falling onto a bank statement, a jewelry receipt, a betrayal made of paper and ink, we've all felt something like it. You know that moment, don't you? When the floor seems to disappear beneath feet that have walked this earth for 6 or 7 decades. When trusted hands suddenly become strangers' hands. When the retirement you planned becomes a battlefield you never trained for. But here's what Martin discovered. And maybe you have too. The wisdom gathered over a lifetime isn't just for reminiscing on porch swings. It's armor for the battles we never saw coming. Those professional skills you honed, the friends who recognize your true self, the children who find their way back to truth, these aren't consolation prizes. They're the real treasure. That creaky chair might hold just one where it once held two, but it holds someone stronger than before, someone who knows that dignity reclaimed is more valuable than dignity never tested. That's the gift hidden within the wound, the discovery that your story still has chapters worth writing.